Hello everyone, my name is Paul Stevens and welcome back to our short-term rentals webinars. This one on Leading on Advocacy Roundtable, Why Your Industry Needs You, sponsored by Price Labs and Minute. I'm the editor of Short-Term Rentals here at International Hospitality Media and also the host for today's session. And before we begin, let's introduce our first webinar series sponsor. This is revenue management solution Price Labs.
Price Labs, a leader in revenue management, is unveiling its breakthrough release. Discover the new hyperlocal pulse dynamic pricing algorithm. By tapping into hyperlocal market trends, it's setting new standards in accurate pricing and response to market changes. With our smart presets, customize our algorithm easily and get personalized guidance. With our desktop app, speed up your workflows and manage multiple listings smoothly from your computers. Experience our award-winning product, created by a world-class data science team. With our global reach, anyone, anywhere can use Price Labs. Discover more game-changing updates crafted to propel your short-term rentals to success. Visit pricelabs.co/breakthrough today.
And a big thank you to Price Labs for sponsoring this webinar series. And next up, we have property monitoring company Minute.
Hi there, we're Minute. We make home sharing work for everyone, hosts, guests, and communities alike. We've developed the world's first indoor and outdoor sensor built specifically for hospitality, and the only one that integrates with Airbnb. The Minute sensor monitors noise, occupancy, motion, and temperature. It's camera-free, so it protects your guest privacy. We can help you prevent parties and noise complaints, enhance guest experience, and protect your rental properties, just like a co-host would. When Minute detects noise, it notifies the host. It can also contact your guests via Airbnb messages, SMS, or an automated phone call. Similarly, you'll be the first to know when there's a risk of crowd, the AC malfunctions, or someone tries to enter your rental between bookings. And the best part is, you can install Minute yourself in minutes. That's why we're trusted by hosts and hospitality professionals in more than 100 countries. Find out more about how Minute can help you host happy at minute.com.
And a big thank you to Minute, as well as Price Labs for sponsoring this webinar series. So please keep your sound on mute and your camera off if you're not a speaker today. All of the details will be posted in the chat by my colleagues Joe and Danny. So please do post any questions you have there yourself throughout today's webinar. Our discussion will last roughly around 45 minutes before we move on to some audience questions. Please do post there. And a recording will be sent round to everyone within 48 hours of the session today. So let's introduce our expert speaker lineup for today. Really looking forward to this one. And we're going to kick off, please, with Steve. Just briefly introduce yourself, Steve.
Yeah, hi, Steve Milo, founder and CEO of VTrips. We're based in the US market. We manage around 6,000 exclusive properties in 30 markets in the United States, and they're all leisure or resort markets. We're not an urban.
Thank you very much, Steve. And next up, we have Victoria from the EHHA.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning to everyone, whoever is listening. My name is Victoria Molnar. I represent European Holiday Home Association. As the name suggests, it is the European Association, voice of short-term rental accommodation. I'm based in Brussels, and I lobby EU institutions on behalf of all the short-term rental accommodation players. And EHHA members are online short-term rental platforms, national associations, which represent property managers, property owners in Europe. And we also have companies which provide ancillary services to the short-term rental accommodation providers. So Minute and Price Labs are EHHA members. So thank you very much for doing this webinar.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Next, we have Ben, please.
Hello, my name is Ben. I'm from Sykes Holiday Cottages. The B Corp certified holiday cottage company, have 22 1,000 properties in the UK, short-term lets, holiday lets. And I advise the company about regulations that are coming, that are already in, help those who list with us abide by the regulations and know what's coming. And I also work to engage decision makers in government around policy making and development.
Thank you, Ben. And last but by no means least, we have Kieran, please, all the way from Australia.
Thanks, Paul. So my name is Kieran Craig-Jones, and I'm the Executive Director of STAR, which is the Short-Term Accommodation Association Australia. I'm based down here in Brisbane. We are by far definitely the new kids on the block when it comes to associations. However, we have been working with our international counterparts due to them absolutely being the experts in the field. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you very much, Kieran, and appreciate it all the more. This might not be the last time we say it, but it is 1 o'clock in the morning your time. But such is the importance of this topic that you wanted to participate. So we really, really appreciate it.
Correct.
So
thanks.
So to add a bit of context to today's discussion, we're going to be exploring a wide range of markets covered by our speakers today, and also their different approaches to regulations. So we've got from bans in Portugal, in Florence and Amsterdam, just to give 3 examples, to licensing schemes on the next page, in the UK and Australia, lots coming in, and fast moving situation, I should add as well. And to our next page as well, in some cases, we're having a mix of both both registration schemes and bans in New York City and in Penang in Malaysia, which is threatening to have the first national crackdown on short-term rentals. So we wait to see what happens there. We'll also be looking at what the future holds for regulations in Europe, with the results of a data sharing proposal due to be announced imminently. I know we'll be hearing a bit more from Victoria. There's been an announcement today, actually, so Victoria will be able to give her first reaction to that. And finally, we have some examples here of how we've covered advocacy on short-term rentals before, including on the left-hand side there, a session that I hosted on this particular topic at June's SCIFT Short-Term Rental Summit in New York City, and that is available to watch now on YouTube. So this is a roundtable, so we're going to hear from all of our speakers today. Everyone's going to get their chance to speak, and we're hoping to have a good-natured debate with lots of opinions coming in. So, Steve, I'm going to turn to you first. And I know when it comes to issues within the industry, you present some quite forthright opinions. And I know as well with the VRMA, you've got your own advocacy fund as well that you're contributing to at VRMA events, including Orlando next month. So I think this puts you in a really good position to answer my first question. And essentially it is, what are you seeing in terms of the real challenges for our sector right now in terms of regulation and what the future holds?
Well, that's a big question, and there's a lot of detail to it. I would say the biggest issue right now is that those who oppose short-term rentals and even those who may be neutral are being heavily influenced by the narrative that short-term rentals take away from affordable housing. And that is a very, very difficult argument for us to overcome. And that's come up over and over again in some of the places you've cited, in the US, obviously Europe, now Asia. So I'll stop there.
Okay. I mean, I think was there something more that you wanted to touch on there? I mean, we talked before about the sort of $56 million economic impact of short-term rentals as well. So how do you think? I mean, we quote there about affordable housing and long-term solutions there. You know, what essentially has the short-term rental been highlighted in this way, do you think?
Well, I think the bigger issue is, of course, we know what the problems are, and we certainly can now provide a lot of information to people about the hotspots that are being affected by rental regulations. The bigger challenge has been why so many property managers have not stepped up and become organized in a way with real money being put into advocacy. It's pitiful how little money has been put into advocacy versus the virtue signaling you see on places like LinkedIn. I mean, there are examples where we should be on the offense, not always playing defense. I certainly strongly believe that while it's important to fight at the city and local level, the only place to actually go on offense and get actual pro-vacation rental regulations is to go at the state level or the national level. And we've done that in the state of Florida. We did a little of that in the state of Texas, but it requires an organization. It requires a lobbyist. It requires raising money to be able to create political donations. It requires coordinated efforts with companies like the VRMA who do economic impact studies, and then having boots on the ground to make sure those economic impact studies get into the hands of politicians, and you sit with them and you explain what these numbers mean. That is organization, and so little of what's happened in this industry is because our property managers neither put in the money or the time. I keep hearing the argument, well, they don't have money. Well, I've seen these people in person. I've looked at their watches. I've seen these massive handbags. I see the jewelry. I see the cars. They have money. They have made a choice not to put money into their industry. They've also made a choice not to volunteer their time. So partly it's because of the lack of property managers being willing to step up and protect their industry.
Thank you for that, Steve. I mean, of course, there's going to be markets with different approaches, and we're seeing different regulatory landscapes. Some associations and organizations, of course, are much more perhaps long established as well than others. I'm going to turn to Victoria as well, and based in Europe. You're acting Secretary General at the European Holiday Home Association. Now, I did hint a little bit earlier that there's been a big announcement in Europe at the moment, just this morning actually, by the Internal Market and Consumer Protection as well. So firstly, before I get onto those big challenges, could you actually just explain a little bit about what that announcement today involves?
Yeah, if you haven't seen in the media, some political parties from the European Parliament were tweeting and releasing the press releases about that the Internal Market and Consumers Committee of within, which is within the European Parliament, voted on the report on the Commission's proposal for a regulation on the short-term rental collection and data sharing. So EU as such has been actually increasingly looking at the short-term rental issues, and the issues such as the fragmentation of the rules at the national, at the local level. This last year, actually, European Commission proposed the regulation for the short-term rental collection, data collection and sharing. And what does it do? It is the proposal for an EU law, which, if adopted, will be directly applied in all EU member states. And this EU law sets the framework for short-term rental collection and data sharing. So member states, according to this proposal, will have to create registration, short-term rental registration schemes, procedures, during which short-term rental hosts will have to declare their short-term rental activity. And in turn, short-term rental platforms will be obliged to feed the activity, short-term rental activity data to the competent authorities of the member states. So this pretty much sets the framework for the data collection and sharing, data where everybody needs the short-term rental data because nobody knows what is actually happening on the ground. And we hope that if competent authorities, public authorities, whenever they will have this data, that it will lead to a more proportionate, more justified, more non-discriminatory short-term rental rules at the local level. So, and today the Parliament voted on their position. We already have the council's position. They adopted their position already in February this year. We have the Commission's original proposal, the original text. And what will happen to the next is that all these three EU institutions will come together and they will agree on the final EU text, EU regulation. And so whenever they will agree, and we actually hope and expect that this regulation will be adopted probably by December. So we will have EU law, which will set the framework on how to collect the short-term rental data and how platforms should share their data with the competent authorities.
And that's really good, and probably much better than I could have explained it there, Victoria. So December, we're looking at the actual implementation of these new of this registration scheme across the European Union. Are there any particular challenges though from this regulation? Because we are hearing a difference of opinion. Some people are very much in favour, and there's others who are less keen, and a lot of people perhaps in the middle who are keen on this regulation but want it to be proportionate in a way. What challenges are you particularly concerned about with this new regulation?
So I would like to probably make a division, talking about the EU law, this proposal for regulation, and talking about the local short-term rental rules. Because this EU regulation, I think it's a very good first step. First we will collect all the data where every single authority in Europe needs it. If we collect the data, they will know what is the short-term rental market. They will be able to address hopefully pending issues in cities in a proportionate and justified way. What is the biggest challenge still remains for the short-term rental industry is the fragmentation of short-term rental rules within the EU. So new regulations as such are not a threat if they are justified, if they're proportionate, if they are non-discriminatory, if they're cutting the red tape for the short-term rental providers, and obviously if they comply with the EU law. As an industry, we face a challenge in the EU, and a big one, because this big challenge is this fragmentation, which I was talking about. These new rules, which are popping, in different cities across Europe, they could eventually stop your business, any short-term rental business, because look what happened in Portugal. We always treated Portugal as the best case example when it comes to short-term rental rules, short-term rental registration scheme. Portugal was one of the pioneers which actually in Europe created the short-term rental registration scheme, which was working brilliantly. And what happened? They got the new housing minister, and the new housing minister decided that by 2030, all short-term rental providers will lose their licenses. So advocacy is very important here, and lobbying is very important here, because if you don't do anything, somebody will go behind your back and they will do the lobby against you. And and these people like me included, and all these people on this panel and national associations, they're doing absolutely best to give a voice to all of you. And just talking about a bit of the numbers, maybe, Paul, short-term rentals are the consumer-driven phenomenon, and it is a fast-growing sector. And there's also some expectations that these numbers will grow even further. If we look at Europe, in 2022, more than 547 million guest nights in the European Union were booked via 4 online short-term rental platforms, or on average 1.5 million short-term rental guests each day. Looking at another indicator, each minute, around 90 short-term rental stays are being booked, or each day nearly 130,000 short-term rental stays are being booked. So these are very, very impressive numbers. And we just need the bad regulation coming into the picture, and that's it. These numbers can go way down, if not to zero, if bans are being imposed, on the short-term rental services.
Yeah, and it's clear that these are very realistic, concerns to people's livelihoods as well. We've seen up in Scotland and right across the UK at the moment, and I know we'll come back to some of those points because we'll move on to some of the opportunities shortly, but I want to move halfway across, well, more than halfway across the world actually, to Kieran as well, because some of these issues that are being raised, and we've talked a little bit about Melbourne in that context. What are some of the big challenges though that you're facing in Australia? What is maybe similar to what you've heard or different?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think one of our biggest challenges over here at the moment is us being unfairly benchmarked against the international cities. So, to give Melbourne as an example, I think they've got approximately 4,000 short-term rental properties, and we're being benchmarked against cities like Madrid, Barcelona, London. It's just completely ridiculous, in my opinion, and we should not be being benchmarked against these type of cities. And I think that the policy makers really need to do more research and provide, hard factual data to be able to roll out these policies and regulations which they're proposing, because at the moment they're not even consulting people, and it's just being done very, very unfairly across Australia. In particular in Queensland, the state government recently carried out an independent report, and the findings were that short-term rentals are not contributors towards the housing crisis and lack of affordable housing. So that was a really good outcome for Queensland, and this is something that we're reminding all our other states and territories here in Australia. So just so everyone's also aware, we are made up of 8 different states and territories here in Australia, and they all have their own separate laws. So we're basically kind of dealing with 8 different countries. It's not just, yeah.
And you've come up now with this STAR organisation, that's STRZZ, not AA, for those of us here in the UK. But why do you believe that they are benchmarking? For us in the industry, that would seem like a hard to understand, shall we say?
Yeah, I think they're just looking at the cities with, some of the hardest regulations, because ideally that's what they want to implement over here. Melbourne are all for caps. We have Byron Bay, who went through the independent public inquiry back in February. And they've been given all different recommendations, but the key recommendation that obviously the media are putting out for clickbait is the cap of 60 days. Now, that's currently in the hands of the New South Wales Planning Minister, and he has said he won't be doing an announcement until probably in the new year, because they're obviously looking into the impacts of tourism, because Byron Bay, its key thing is tourism. And without tourism, Byron Bay will obviously die.
Thank you very much for that perspective down under there, Kieran. Now, Ben, I know you're always dealing with governments. You've worked in the government, or you've worked in everything from regulatory, international, public law. You've worked in local government, and now you're head of regulation policy at Sykes Cottages as well. What are you seeing as the big challenges right now facing the industry from your side?
Thanks a lot, Paul. I'd echo, what you've heard from fellow panelists. Similar concerns around short-term lets being seen to be an easy target for or scapegoats for housing supply issues. It's getting the message out there that short-term lets contribute, for example, 6 times as much to local economies as empty second homes. And in discussion in the UK, at least, short-term lets or holiday lets and second homes are put together, are treated as one of the same. And so it's just making sure that people are basing discussions and policy decisions on facts, and recognizing the importance of the industry for local jobs. I think that's yeah, I'd say that's the main issue. And of course, that while short-term lets are very popular, consumers are very price sensitive at the moment, and so the cost of living crisis in the UK, inflation, beyond UK borders as well, means that people are price sensitive, and so things are very competitive. I've been at a conference today, and there's been a lot of discussion about tourist levies, for example, and people, those making decisions might think, oh, well, that's an easy way to just get a bit of extra money for local funding, for local projects and regeneration. The problem being that ultimately it isn't really a tax on tourists; it's a tax on accommodation providers. They're going to have to swallow that £1, £2, £3 levy. And so I think it's just making sure that the debate is framed properly. And as everyone else has already said, it's about engaging with decision makers and making sure that they appreciate what the sector does, and that, for example, at Sykes, our owners, people who list their properties with Sykes, on average, they own 1.3 properties each. So these are people who've inherited a property maybe from parents. They're treating it as their pension. They're running a small business. They're doing the cleaning and the turnovers and making sure the property's nice and leaving nice hampers for guests and so on. These are small businesses that are working really hard in very difficult economic conditions. And I think it's making people realize that this isn't all about huge tech platforms. These are small businesses that have grown, that people have grown, and that actually it's a very organic sector on the whole. And that you can't measure holiday lets in terms of the size of Airbnb, say. Yes, Airbnb has grown by this percentage over the last decade, but that doesn't mean the whole sector has. It's just that more and more properties will be on the big platforms. So I think it's making sure that people are making policy decisions based on data and about evidence rather than anecdotally. And as you said, I've been in central government myself, and it was, as a lawyer there, it was a point I always made, that it has to be, policies have to be based on evidence. What are we trying to get to? Do we need to regulate? Are we going for the right target? And be careful of unintended consequences as well. So we're working hard to talk with decision makers in central government, local government, and so on. And
Thank you very much, Ben, and lots of different points raised there as well. We want to encourage some interaction. I've seen a couple of comments and questions already from our audience. So if you've got any thoughts on what you're hearing, you want to put forward your own suggestions about how we're work out regulatory frameworks moving around in different markets, then please do post your questions or thoughts in the chat as well. I think that moves us on actually quite nicely to the second part and looking perhaps at more of a positive outlook about actually how what opportunities are available now within the industry and how we can move forward with regulation. Steve, I know you've got some interesting thoughts on it, because what you've heard from our fellow panelists is that we hear that short-term rentals is this flourishing asset class. So what opportunities are there still from maybe an educational perspective from what you see?
Well, I mean, if we actually get organized, which I think the state of Florida is the most organized state in the country of the United States, and we have been able to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars. We have our own lobbyists. We have our own PAC. We're doing fundraising. Even at the VRMA event, there'll be a offset fundraising event. And we've been able to get some of the larger property managers in the state involved, which is the key. What we've done is to make sure at the state level or the national level that the politicians are educated about the economic impact of vacation rentals or short-term rentals. And you kind of alluded to it in the first question. So in the state of Florida, it is a $56 billion industry, $56 billion economic impact per year. It's double the size or of the UK market, I believe. And literally we sat with politicians and they did not know. Now we're dealing with some pretty smart people, and we concentrated some of our meetings with the leadership of the Senate or the House. We even had a meeting with Governor DeSantis, the governor of Florida, and we spent an hour with him talking about the economic impact of vacation rentals. And he didn't say he didn't know, but I mean, he was very focused on the conversation. And we said we were local. We weren't a San Francisco-based company or an Austin-based company. We were property managers. You know, it resonates with politicians when you can let them understand how big of a job, how big of taxes, et cetera, but it has to be at the national level, not the local level. There's different arguments at the local level. Having those conversations and then simultaneously donating money. It was not free to get a meeting with the governor. It was not free to get meetings with the House or the Senate leadership. They're asking for very large donations. But you do that so that you can educate them. And, you know, that is paying off dividends. Plus you have to have a lobbyist. But, you know, look, I mean, the hotel industry is so much better organized than the short-term rental industry. And it's always been a mystery to me why this has been such a problem. And it starts with, first and foremost, some of the biggest people who are on social media talk about all uniting, but they themselves don't donate a penny, and they don't do any work. And so, you know, these virtue signalers on LinkedIn just waste everyone's time. And I've been pretty clear that it's a waste of oxygen for these people to keep virtue signaling. There's someone in the Alps that spends a lot of time with virtue signaling. This does not help us at all. What helps us is to have conversations like this, conversations where people can replicate some of the stuff we've done in Florida. We're willing to share best practices because we're proud of what we've done in Florida. We have a preemption bill, which means vacation rentals are protected at the state level. Local governments cannot ban, regulate duration or frequency of vacation rentals. We then strengthened it this year with a local ordinance bill, which says that if a local government does something that's arbitrary or unconstitutional, we can freeze that, get a stay, and go through a rocket docket through the judicial system. And if we win, they pay attorney's fee. And we're working literally with the House and leadership now on another bill that will create certification and registration and allow us to weed out bad apples. We've been proactive, and part of that is we've also speak with the OTAs and make sure that they are aligned with us in the state of Florida. But this is what every nation has to do. It's doing this at the local level makes no sense. It's too late if you're trying to defend Paris or Barcelona. You have to go to the national level. You need to be united. You need every large company to get together and to contribute, not just money, but their time, and to fundraise and to contribute.
Thank you, Steve. We will come actually at the end of this about the benefits of joining organisations and associations there. So we'll be able to go into a little bit more detail, but I appreciate your thoughts there as well. And Victoria as well, from a European perspective, you discussed the challenges there, but you know, of short-term rentals, I guess we know a lot of the benefits already, but you know, from the way that you're consulting with these governments and authorities, what are you putting forward as the case?
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to reflect what Steve was saying, that so first of all, thanks God that I'm in Europe and we don't need to pay money to the policymakers to meet them. We just need to be persuasive enough. So thanks God I'm in Europe, Steve, and I feel sorry for you. Anyway, so yeah, short-term rental what kind of opportunity short-term rental provides, right? And I think this is one of the essential parts what every short-term rental player needs to say when they are meeting policymakers. I think Ben was talking about the impact. Karen was talking about making some, the impact assessments, what kind of impact short-term rental industry actually provides to the to the local economies, local communities. So maybe just to put few, what I'm usually saying during my conversations with EU policymakers is that, first of all, what short-term rentals give? Short-term rentals give consumers a greater choice, right? And EU, in the recent years, they did a lot of studies. There's also Eurostat is publishing short-term rental statistics. Now they're actually publishing statistics even on the monthly basis at the granular municipality level. So if you Google Eurostat short-term rental accommodation, you will find all the data. So they're doing a lot of things. And a few years ago, EU made Eurobarometer opinion poll where they asked people if they ever booked the short-term rentals via online platforms. And the results show that among those who have actually used short-term rental services via online short-term rental platforms, nearly 9 in 10 would recommend short-term rental services to the other people. So you can see that, and then what I said before, that short-term rentals are the consumer-driven phenomenon. Consumers love short-term rentals. Consumers stayed in short-term rentals during the COVID times because they were afraid to stay in hotels because everybody presumed that hotels accommodate a lot of people, and short-term rentals do not do that. So first, consumers get a greater choice. Second, it creates opportunities for those citizens to generate additional income on an occasional basis. So, and now it is especially very important when we have this cost of living crisis, right? So families, if they have, I don't know, if they want to share an extra room, or if they have, I don't know, a second home or something, they can share it on an occasional basis. And this eventually adds to their family business. They can, pretty much pay the invoices. Third, it creates opportunities, obviously, for entrepreneurs, SMEs, micro enterprises, those startups who just are digging or putting their feet into the short-term rental ocean. So they can eventually, they have the fewer properties, they can post it on, advertise it on online platforms, and that's it. They have the access to absolutely all consumers in the world. Fourth, short-term rentals bring, benefits to the communities, local economies. And here, local economies and local communities which are eager to reap the benefits from tourism, right? Because there were somebody were talking about that, cities are unfairly, and I do agree, cities are unfairly treating short-term rentals. So they are putting over restrictive rules on short-term rentals in order to bring houses back to the housing market, etc., etc. This is very unfair treatment. And usually where it happens in the very rich and highly touristic cities. These highly, touristic and rich cities, they're very vocal, and they're saying, hey, we, curb short-term rentals. We crack down the short-term rentals for the benefit, of bringing few houses to the housing market. So housing issues are very complex issues, and short-term rentals should not be the only scapegoat to be blamed, for absolutely all existing problems in these rich cities. So short-term rental really can bring benefits to communities which want to get benefits from the tourism. And I actually heard many good stories where people, for example, buy properties. In Italy, you sometimes can buy a castle or the entire village for €1. So, and I heard stories where people actually buy these, properties. They turn them into the short-term rental. And what happens at the end? They revive the local communities. They open bakeries, and local people are super happy because, look, it created business for them. And the fifth one, short-term rentals, you know, I would say even is a green solution for the accommodation, because it uses properties which already exist. You know, we don't need, you know, to build new houses. The houses are already there. It is somebody's houses, or it is managed by somebody. So we use what is there already on the ground. So anyway, so I think short-term rentals create many benefits, creates innovation. I'm always very happy to see lots of companies which provide ancillary services to the short-term rental accommodation providers. I think there's lots of innovation happening there, and I hope it will continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, and Kieran as well. You've heard, you know, from a tourism side and educational perspective. What would you highlight most of all as the benefits for that can result from regulation?
Yeah, I agree both with Steve and Victoria, so I'll just keep this short. The biggest thing I want to say is we have a lot of regional areas here in Australia where we don't have accommodation options. We solely have short-term rental properties. There's no hotels there, there's no, you know, backpackers or anything like that. And then also, we have a lot of key large sporting events, or we also have the 2032 Brisbane Olympics coming up. Part of the bid for the Olympics and how we won that bid was down to the amount of short-term rental properties we had available for the travellers coming in for the Olympics.
Thank you very much, Kieran. I'm going to come to Ben shortly, and I'm seeing lots of questions coming into the chat as well. But I want to make sure that we hear from all of you, because before starting this webinar, we got you all to present a sort of a little manifesto of what a future of smart and proportionate regulation would be. And I know, Ben, you've put forward a very compelling case as well. I would ask probably that if people keep it to around a minute and a half and just round up the main points from their manifesto, that would be really handy. So Ben, I know there's lots of interesting things you've got to say, so I'll let you take it away.
Thanks very much. So yeah, my manifesto. As we've heard, there is an increased desire of many holidaymakers to stay in holiday lets rather than traditional forms of accommodation. Families like somewhere to cook and they want outdoor space. Digital nomads want a desk to work at. And that's the bedrock of many local visitor economies, which have benefited from the post-COVID staycation boom. The report that we commissioned from Oxford Economics shows that in 2021, holiday let linked activity contributed £27.7 billion to UK GDP and supported approximately 500,000 jobs. And as I said, discussion often conflates empty second homes with short-term lets, but policies shouldn't treat them the same, given that short-term lets contribute 6 times more to local economies than unlet second homes. So we think there should be data. We just had a comment about the lack of data in Wales on which policies are made. And exactly, how can you have an impact assessment when you haven't got the data to be able to measure that impact? If you don't know who's operating as a short-term let and where, then you can't measure the impact on them. So the challenged Scottish licensing scheme is negatively impacting its tourism income. So that's not the route to go down. It takes up to 12 months to get licenses, and it leaves businesses and holidaymakers in limbo, with 32 different schemes by councils across the country with disproportionate fees and requirements on holiday lets. Instead, we think there should be a mandatory national register of all holiday lets that's crucially online, instant, and requires declaration of compliance with health and safety requirements for holiday lets. And those requirements need to be set out clearly, which currently they're not. It'd be easy for governments to set up. It would efficiently provide them and local authorities with accurate and rich data on the market and enable an evidence-based, proportionate approach to policy making without unforeseen negative impacts on communities, owners, and visitors. People look to AirDNA for the data, but this only measures the number of holiday lets on Airbnb and Vrbo. And they're made up of so many different things. So main homes or rooms within them that are let out for short periods of times. previously derelict buildings that have been brought back into use by people who've heavily invested in them, like the Italy example, units on farmers and others' land as they've diversified it for the purposes of an extra income, all sorts of examples, yurts, glamping, otherwise empty and large and expensive to run second homes. They're being used in the holiday let. So whilst that registration scheme is being set up, that would provide visitors with assurances that they're staying in compliant accommodation. It would educate hosts about their existing health and safety responsibilities, and local councils could target their resources, including local services, as they'd know where short-term lets are located and conduct spot checks if they want. And just very quickly, some solutions around housing supply rather than just scapegoating holiday lets. There should be disincentivization through tax or otherwise of the chronic underuse of existing buildings and land which contribute less or indeed nothing, either economically or otherwise, to local communities. So, for example, land banking, where property developers are sitting on land with planning permission and not building, frankly. So there's over 500,000 homes that have been given planning permission to be built in the UK that haven't been built, which, you know, vastly dwarfs the holiday let sector in the UK. We'd also encourage, you know, greater taxation of empty second homes rather than short-term lets. There's 500,000 of those in England. And also unused and underused land. So short-term lets, we've already said people want to stay in them increasingly. There's plenty of buildings in this country that aren't being used, whether it's retail, whether it's other forms of accommodation or office space or empty homes. Don't target those properties which people want to use and want to make use of them, which contribute to local jobs. Target properties that are empty when we're looking at providing buildings to be homes.
Thank you very much, Ben. So let's go to, I'm going to slightly change the order a little bit, but Kieran, would you just be able to put forward your manifesto for what you're looking at for the Australian market?
Yeah, we are very similar to Ben's, so I won't repeat any of that. We are fully supportive of that. Also, we just really want to have a sensible framework at a state level rolled out here rather than at a local government level. And what we are proposing, such as in the UK, is a straightforward registration scheme with a nominal fee payable, because at the moment our fees are anywhere from $25 up to $450. There shouldn't be such a vast jump in between different local authorities. And we believe once these few, you know, simple regulations are brought in together with a code of conduct, again at the state level, and clear safety regulations, because we're lacking the safety regulations over here. We only have one state currently, which is New South Wales, who do have the registration, the code of conduct and the safety legislation, but it still isn't perfect. And, you know, there's ways that we can improve on it. And I think by, you know, putting these out at the state level, it will play a really important part in the Australian tourism sector.
Thank you very much, Kieran there. Steve, and you've sort of touched on some of this already, or at least alluded to redirecting money towards a national level rather than such a local level. But how would you go about changing the industry or rules in its current guise?
Well, what I've said is VTrips will support other state organizations, which essentially are the effective national, right? So in Europe, you need an organization in Portugal, an organization in Spain, an organization in France. We'll support those as we move forward. We did one in Texas. We're obviously targeting the states that have the largest concentration of vacation rentals. We think that the state level is where you can get preemption, where you can protect the industry. It's been frustrating to watch the amount of money that's been wasted at the city level. There was a lawsuit, one in Austin, Texas, that people were running around on LinkedIn excited about. It took them 7 years. All it did was grandfather existing people in. Most of the people who had vacation rentals long ago sold their properties. Litigation, running local cities is not going to address this. You've got to go to the state level. You've got to meet with people who are willing to understand the economic impact that everybody in this panel has talked about, that can kind of cut through the nonsense of the fair housing issue, which has just been completely debunked. And once you get to the national level, I think that nonsense goes away. I mean, we all are aware what creates fair housing shortages. It is a lack of density. And the people who have screamed the most about fair market housing have been, at least in the United States, progressive or liberals. They have done the most aggressive reduction of density. They are the ones who have actually created the fair housing crisis. So it's actually going up and discussing this and saying that short-term rentals are not the problem, but we are a solution for tax revenue and jobs, and we want to be good stewards. That's what wins this argument, but it's getting out of this hand-to-hand combat in the cities. We're not going to win if all we're doing is trying to defend ourselves in a city council where, in many cases, the fix is in and they're going to zone us out.
Thank you, Steve, and yeah, appreciate that. And Victoria as well. I mean, interesting timing with the announcement today as well. So, what would be your manifesto building on what we've seen today?
I totally agree what this webinar speakers were saying. About the registration scheme. I think this is one of the probably first key steps which have to be done. For everyone to collect the data about the short-term rentals. Being on the ground, but there is one thing which have to be addressed before that, and it has to be addressed by all of us, by all the short-term rental players. It is raising awareness about the complexity of the short-term rental ecosystem, because that I always like giving questions to representatives of member states. I said, please tell me, can you please tell me the name or the names of short-term rental players What do they come up with? They come up with few online platforms and the short-term rental hosts. And this is a pity, because this is how they see the short-term rental ecosystem. Short-term rental ecosystem is way more complex than that. And then, I present them the short-term rental ecosystem, which I prepared. They're usually, which is super, super complex, and every short-term rental player is interconnected with each other. They're usually very, very much appalled, and they have no further comments on that. So it is very important for all of us talk to the policymakers and show that your business is actually contributing to the local communities, that you belong to the short-term rental ecosystem, because no or very low level of understanding of the short-term rental ecosystem at the policy making level always leads to these stricter, unjustified, disproportionate short-term rental rules, which were actually built in mind having few short-term rental players. But what that eventually happens at the end, that it affects every single short-term rental player on the ground. So this is very important, that every one of you, would talk to the policymakers, tell who you are, why your business matters, what do you bring to local communities, because this is what is missing, I think, in our short-term rental sector, raising awareness, how great impact we bring to the local communities.
Thank you very much, Victoria, and to all of our panelists there. Even if opinions are slightly different, I think we all share the same goal, and that's really building a short-term rental sector and explaining the benefits and the opportunities there as well. I'll get to a couple of comments and questions shortly before we finish. So Jamie Miles in North Wales, thank you very much for your comment. Again, the narrative is the same here as in Europe. Housing scapegoat. Dana from Rent Responsibility, bravo Ben. Mark Hernandez, where's the super like button here, all the way from Canada. Melissa agreeing with what Steve has said there as well. Donna, thank you very much for putting in a link to Rent Responsibly. In the questions as well. Now, I do probably want to touch, we've probably got just a couple of minutes here. So quickly, just why people should want to join an association or organization. Neil Wagner, we want to start an STR association for Canada. So does one of our speakers want to come in there on how we can get started an STR association in Canada? If you just want to raise your hand or come in here, then please do just go ahead. Steve or Victoria or Kieran or
yeah, I can start. Yeah, you know, we as industry, as Bob Marley would sing, need to get up, stand up for your right. So we need to take action. You know, we need to take action to avoid unfair oppression, right? So, and how we can do it? We can do it by, you know, or you can do it if you run a short-term rental business. You can do it by joining the association. If there is no association at the national level, regional level, whatever place you are based, you need to create one. Lobbying and advocacy, you know, do not give direct and immediate benefits for you as a short-term rental, you know, service provider. Lobbying and advocacy provide an indirect impact for your short-term rental business activity. So a basis for a smoother, less burdensome rules whenever you do business. So if you want to contribute to the better rules for your own business, that's why you need to do advocacy and lobbying. It is not an easy job to do, but it can be very rewarding because, as I said, you just need to educate policymakers that you are there, what kind of impact you bring to the communities, and etc. And this works. The education works. This is very, very powerful thing. And I think even Nelson Mandela said that education is the most powerful thing in the world. It can change things. So yeah, join the association. And if you don't do it now, tomorrow it can be too late because your competitors, you know, may be already meeting policymakers at the national, regional level, wherever you're based, and they're probably discussing how to create rules which would actually destroy your business. So it's very important. Thank you.
Quoting Bob Marley and Nelson Mandela in one section of speech, so that's pretty impressive. So thank you very much, Victoria. Just quickly, actually, I'd like to go to Kieran because you have created this STAAA organization recently as well. So what would maybe be your advice for someone just starting out on their journey?
I would definitely say you do need to be absolutely 110% dedicated for the cause. We are a completely volunteer association, so we all, you know, have full-time jobs as well as own businesses and things like that. And so all our time is absolutely free time given to the industry. And also not be afraid to have, you know, difficult conversations with the policymakers as well as the activists. I found by attending the Independent Public Commissioner's inquiry down in Byron Bay and meeting with the protesters face to face, it actually takes, you know, you get a lot more out of having these upfront conversations. At first, obviously, it's quite difficult and they're quite rude towards you, but when you actually sit down and you listen to them and hear their stories and then, you know, start working together and, you know, trying to meet in the middle, you actually get a lot more respect in the industry from it.
Thank you very much, Kieran. And actually, well, Ben as well, we're talking here about public affairs and lobbying. So it's great to have a lawyer on the panel as well, and hopefully our attendees as well will be able to follow up with you. Anything you wanted to add shortly to that, Ben, or? No, we're good.
I think all covered. I'd absolutely say engage with consultations, engage with your local councillors, with your local members of Parliament, members of the Senate, members of the Scottish Parliament. Engage. And people might think that consultations are a tick box exercise, or they're, you know, it's not worth your time. It absolutely is, because you never know, you know, when the email that you send a member of Parliament is the one that, you know, the straw that breaks the camel's back is the one that they think, you know what, this is, or it hits them at the right time and they read it and think this chimes with what I'm thinking too. I'm not sure that, you know, my colleagues in Parliament are going down the right route. So I would say every email you can send, every bit of engagement you can do to tell them, and also try and make it fact-based. so not emotive. Just tell them what's happening to you, to your business, to your community, jobs around you. Tell them what's happening, because people need to know what's really happening out there.
Thank you very much, Ben. And Nuno, great comment from Alep in Portugal. Even with a focus on public affairs and lobbying, life is not easy for the industry. Thank you, Antonio, as well. Thank you for the time and effort you put in helping everyone out. Lots of useful hints here. So a big thank you to all of you. Honestly, this hour has absolutely flown by. It's been a fantastic discussion. I only wish we had a bit more time, but I really think they would be getting really too far past Kieran's bedtime probably in Australia. And yeah, a big thank you to all four of you for taking part today. We know that this is a big discussion right now. So we've got a couple of slides just to run through first before we finish, and we are going to keep the session open for a little bit past these slides, just in case you want to follow up with any questions. We're back on Tuesday, the 3rd of October for a Touch Day sponsored webinar all about customer lifetime value, how to increase revenue, shift orphan nights, pitch upsells. I'll be back for that, and the link to sign up is in the chat now. We've got a really exciting in-person event coming up in London on Wednesday, the 18th of October. This is the first event that we've done as such, our inaugural short-term rental summit with Skift as our exclusive media partner for this. We've got speakers from the likes of Booking.com, Hopper, Aways, AB Bernstein, Faya Ventures. Steve, of course, is there too as well. So we hope to see lots of you there too. The link to get your tickets is in the chat, and we also have a £100 discount code for buying 2 or more tickets, and that is on screen for you now. And we'd love to see lots of you there, so it would be a fantastic event. For opportunities to work with us, please do contact my colleagues Piers and Jordan. Their details are on screen for you now. As I said, we're going to keep the session open for just another 2 minutes. At the end, if you want to jot down any details from the chat and our contact details, there has been an awful lot there, so please do take advantage of that. In the meantime, thank you to Price Labs and Minute for sponsoring this series. Thank you again to Steve, to Victoria, to Ben, and to Kieran. And thank you all for listening today. We'll see you all again very soon. Thank you, everyone.